And I'm delighted to be able to share with you this morning. We weren't going to show that video because, like, Christmas is over, right? However, I liked it a lot, and you know, we have so many creative people who have helped walk us through, up to and through the Christmas season this year. Ashley Tingley and Barbara Royal put in hours on creating that video, and that's, I thought it was awesome. If you were here Christmas Eve, if you weren't, I'm sorry for you, but if you were here for Christmas Eve, you saw, you saw the product of many hours of people working hard and all of this stuff and the music and all of it. It was just incredible. In my years here, if not the best, it was one of the best Christmas Eve services and most worshipful I've attended. And I want to thank those who put in so much time helping us to explore and appreciate the wonder of Christmas. I hope that you were able to celebrate with some people you really care about, and I hope that you got what you really wanted for Christmas. As a matter of fact, what was your favorite gift? Just shout it out. Oh, the Christmas service. Good answer. We're done. Nobody else. Somebody else said something back here. Family? Yeah. What was your favorite gift? You didn't have favorites? Let me see that. Oh, Sanooks. Sanooks. All right. I like those. Nice. I didn't expect the shoe to be thrown at me. Actually, I'll receive one of my favorite gifts tomorrow as Karen, my wife, and I board a plane first thing early tomorrow morning and head to Nashville to spend a week with our son and daughter-in-law and granddaughter, Abella. And somebody said, well, you're going to be preaching. Are we going to see a picture of Abella? And so I thought, I love this technology. It's going away, unfortunately, so that's your chance to see, there's nothing quite like the wonder of a child as they open a long-awaited Christmas gift. We don't need the pictures up anymore. That'll be distracting. Many years, Karen and I have had the opportunity. All those nice things I said about you, Barb, yeah. Many times over the years, Karen and I have had a lot of joy watching the excitement of our kids as they would unwrap a gift or receive a gift. And in our family, there is a legendary story. Okay, well, maybe it's just legendary in my mind, but a story about one gift that just created this sense of wonder. It was actually, it was either our first or second Christmas as a married couple. I'm not sure which one it was. And Karen and I were living in a little small one-bedroom apartment down in East San Diego County in the town of El Cajon. I was working in a factory and actually getting ready to start seminary. Karen was finishing her teaching degree, working part-time as a preschool teacher, and I think doing other stuff too. But to say that we were living on the edge financially would have been an understatement. It was, one of those challenging times that many young couples experience. And yet, I was somehow able to gather enough money to buy my wife a spectacular Christmas gift, if I do say so myself. I mean, it was a large gift, but I was very secretive about it. She didn't know it was coming. So much so that, I went ahead of time to my in-laws' house and hid it in the garage. So when she showed up on Christmas morning to my in-laws, to her parents' house, she wouldn't know it was there. And it took two of us to carry this box in when it was time for her to open the gift. And when she opened the gift, Karen said, "It's beautiful." And my wife is so gracious, as in that moment, her clueless and fairly new newlywed husband gave my wife a microwave for Christmas. Well, the things that can create wonder, huh? Well, today we are wrapping up a series of messages that we've been in for the last few weeks I've enjoyed it. I hope you have, where we have been talking about the wonder of Christmas. And Kent Wackemeyer started the series reading to us from the first part of Luke chapter 2 about Jesus being presented in the temple at the age of just 8 days. And the wonder that was expressed by Simeon as he realized that he was holding the one that all of the Old Testament pointed toward and all of Israel was hoping for, the one, the Messiah that would bring hope to God's people. Now, between that story at the beginning of Luke 2 and the story that we're going to read today, and the next time that we hear about Jesus, 12 years pass. We don't read anything in the Bible about the boy Jesus. There are some pretty weird stories in books outside of the Bible where people have hypothesized what Jesus' childhood might have been like. Some of them are pretty funny. There's one that suggests that 2 years after Jesus was born, when King Herod got word that a child had been born that was called the King of the Jews, and he issued a decree that all of the male children 2 years under in Bethlehem would be killed. And Jesus and his family fled to Egypt because God, just in the nick of time, warned them what was going to happen. And you might have known that part of the story. But the part of the story you probably didn't know about, that's written in one of these books, says that when Jesus and his family were on their way to Egypt, they stopped overnight and rested in a cave, only to discover that the cave was occupied by a herd of dragons. And so, actually, here's how the story reads. And lo, suddenly there came forth from the cave many dragons. And when the children saw them, they cried out in great terror, you think? But Jesus went and stood on his feet before the dragons, and they adored Jesus, and thereafter went to sleep. There are some weird stories out there about what Jesus' childhood might have looked like or been like. Another one says that when Jesus was 5 years old, he was playing in a little brook and making puddles in a little brook with some friends so that they could make little clay things out of mud. And Jesus created a sparrow out of clay, and not really being the figurine collecting type, he decided to give it life, and it flew away. Seriously, there are so many crazy stories about what Jesus' childhood might have been like, but it's sort of fun to ponder. What was Jesus like as a child? We don't really know. The Bible doesn't really tell us. I found this picture on Facebook of Jesus at bath time with his mother Mary. Okay, I might be in trouble for that one. I don't know for sure. Remember, I said those weird stories out there, all of that, totally unfounded, nothing biblical or nothing. All of those stories really make Jesus out to be something extraordinary, which in one sense is true, but what is probably more true is that in his humanity, Jesus dealt with life just like we do. As Dave said last week, I love the quote. He says, Jesus moved into the neighborhood and lived life like we do. Now, to be clear, again, the disclaimer, all of those stories I just told, they're totally made up. There is no credibility on those, especially the picture I showed, because we have no information about Jesus between the time when he was in the temple at 8 days and the account that we're going to read today from Luke 2, verses 41 to 52. And so if you have your Bibles, you might open them. It'll be on the screen as well. We're going to read Luke 2, 41 through the end of the chapter. So Luke says, every year Jesus' parents went to Jerusalem for the festival of the Passover. And when he was 12 years old, they went up to the festival according to the custom. After the festival was over, while his parents were returning home, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem. But they were unaware of it. Thinking he was in their company, they traveled on for a day. And then they began looking for him among their relatives and friends. When they did not find him, they went back to Jerusalem to look for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple courts, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking questions. Everyone who heard him was amazed at his understanding and his answers. And when his parents saw him, They were astonished. His mother said to him, "Son, why have you treated us like this? Your father and I have been anxiously searching for you." "Why were you searching for me?" he asked. "Didn't you know I had to be to be in my father's house?" But they did not understand what he was saying to them. And then he went down to Nazareth with them and was obedient to them. But his mother treasured all these things in her heart, and Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. So what's going on in this story, this account? Well, Jesus is in the temple again. The last time we saw him in the temple, he was only 8 days old. And this story serves in many ways as a transition between the birth narrative, we just talked about Christmas, and Jesus as an adult. We jump in Luke from Jesus as an 8-day-old to a 12-day-old, and the next time we hear about him is about 22 years later at his baptism with John the Baptist. Jesus and his family have traveled into Jerusalem to visit the temple to celebrate the festival of the Passover, and Luke says that they went every year. So presumably they have done this for several years in a row. We don't really know how many, because it's not likely that during the time that they were in Egypt, just because of distance, they wouldn't have been able to travel into Jerusalem. But they certainly had gone enough times that the trip to Jerusalem to visit the temple to celebrate the Passover was a family tradition. Now, according to Google Maps, which Jesus didn't have, but we do have, it would take 31 hours with today's roads and paths to travel from Nazareth, where Jesus lived, into Jerusalem. And so they would have walked, presumably for 4 to 5 days to get into the city of Jerusalem. And then they would be in Jerusalem for the Passover celebration, which typically lasted 7 days. Maybe they stayed an extra day to visit relatives or whatever. And then by the time the Passover was over, it was completed, they would have been ready to be back home. You know what it's like to go visit family or friends or to go on vacation. It's always exciting to go away, but you're ready to get back home when it's time to go home, back to your own house, to your own bed. Well, Mary and Joseph were just that. They were ready, and so they start the journey back in a caravan with their family and friends and relatives. And Luke says that after 1 day along the journey, they realize that Jesus isn't with them. Home Alone, the prequel, right? And so, I can't even really grasp that. But so Mary and Joseph walk for a day. So they've come out of the city for a day. They walk for a day back into the city of Jerusalem. And Luke tells us that when they get there, they spend 3 more days looking for Jesus. Those of you that are parents, can you imagine the anxiety? Not only is your son missing, now you haven't known where he's at for 4 days, 5 days. One of our kids went through a phase at about the age of 2 where he liked to play hide and seek at the mall. And so we would go into the mall and he would just disappear. The only one of our kids that we used one of those leashes on, because the panic and anxiety of trying to find him when he was hiding inside a rack of those, one of those round racks of clothes, and he just thought it was great fun. Fortunately, he outgrew that. One time when we were in Oregon on vacation, where my family lives, we were visiting a country fair in the town of Tillamook, and a different son just disappeared. A big crowd of people, and we were in a big display hall, and he was just gone. And we were like, where is he? And it was a panicked, well, it was only a couple of minutes, but it seemed like hours that he was missing. And where did we find him? We found him upstairs on the mezzanine in one of the buildings, just kind of casually looking around at things, clueless to the fact that we thought he was lost. I just can't imagine 4 days of searching for a lost child. But that's what they did. And his parents finally find Jesus, and he is just casually sitting in the temple, having a conversation with the Jewish elders and creating a sense of wonder for them with his understanding and his wisdom. In verse 48, Luke says this: when his parents saw him, they were astonished, and his mother said to him, "Son, why have you treated us like this? Your father and I have been anxiously searching for you." I'm not sure about this translation. I'm not sure it's a good translation. The problem with words on a page is you don't see the emotion behind the words. The old King James Version, I love it. "Son, why hast thou thus dealt with us? Behold, thy father and I have sought thee sorrowing." A little bit more emotion. I'm still not sure that grasped it. I think it probably sounded a little bit more like this: "What were you thinking? We have been worried sick. Just wait until we get home." Don't you think that's probably a little bit more what it would have sounded like? Well, that's what they do. After the little exchange in the temple, they head home. And the passage closes telling us that Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and men. Now, there's just a couple of points that I want us to take from this passage as we think about it briefly. The first is this. This is the first of many times when someone didn't understand what Jesus was up to, even though God was working his plan. Verse 50 just says it clearly. Well, there's the point. They did not understand what he was saying to them. They didn't understand. They didn't know what he was talking about. It was 1979, and I had moved from Oregon to California. I had enrolled in a missionary flight training school down in San Diego. It was at what's now San Diego Christian. It was Christian Heritage College then. I was planning to spend my life flying on the mission field somewhere as a missionary pilot. And it was an exciting time for me. I was thrilled to be where I really felt like God had placed me and doing something that I felt would give significance to the rest of my life. But in just a couple of months, it became a time of confusion. One of my primary means of support was a family outside of my family that had said they wanted to support me as I went through my flight training. And they contacted me and said they'd had a financial reversal, and they weren't going to be able to continue to support me, and I didn't have the money to continue the flight training on my own, and so I actually had to drop out of the program. I was very confused about what God was doing. Here I was, 2,000 miles away from home, all by myself. Why did God have me here in California? Okay, well, I met my wife during the first month, but other than that, why did God have me here in California? What was he doing? I couldn't see it. I couldn't see what he was up to. But it was just a short time later, I began to work with another pastor in San Diego County as we worked to plant a church in East San Diego County in the town of Santee. And I enrolled in seminary and began to pursue God's calling on my life to serve him full-time in ministry as a pastor. It was a monumental moment for me and really for us, for the direction of our lives. And then the next 35 years plus since then, we have experienced a sense of wonder many times when we didn't understand what God was up to or what he was doing. But then he would open an opportunity for us to follow him into a new adventure. God was working even when Jesus' parents didn't see it. And God is working in your life, even if you don't see it now. Here's the point. Don't believe that God isn't working just because you don't understand what he's doing. Maybe you're facing a health challenge and you can't see what God is doing. You can trust him. When you're sitting in an ICU with a 1-month-old like we did, and the doctor is saying he doesn't know if the child will make it through the night, you can trust him. Maybe this year it was a financial setback that you've experienced, and it just doesn't seem like God is working. You can trust him. Maybe it's a conflict with a classmate or a coworker or a family member. Whatever it is, even if you don't see how God is working, you can trust that he is. Don't believe that God isn't working just because you don't understand what he's doing. Let me just say this here. If you don't have a personal relationship with God through Jesus, then it's pretty difficult for you to see how God might be working in your life. The first step for you would be to move toward a relationship with God by accepting Jesus as your personal Savior. And if that's something that you'd like to do today, I would love to talk to you after the service. Dave would love to talk to you. Come see us, and we'd like to pray with you. So that's the first thing. Don't believe that God isn't working just because you don't understand. In this passage, we have the first recorded spoken words of Jesus. I think that's significant. And his words are this: "Didn't you know I had to be in my Father's house?" Some other versions say it this way: "Didn't you know I had to be about my Father's business?" So here's the second main point I see in this passage. At 12 years old, Jesus makes a transition from being an observer to doing the Father's work. His family had gone to the temple every year, or at least most of the years, for the 12 years of his life. But this year, something was different for him. Jesus took on a new level of responsibility. He leaned into his calling, if you will. Now, at the age of 12, in that culture, Jesus would have been viewed as being too young to do the work of the Lord. He wouldn't have been considered an adult that had anything to contribute or that anybody should listen to until at least the age of 13. And I love that. It is so like Jesus to turn cultural expectations upside down. He does it throughout his ministry years. In his Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5, Jesus did that with some big cultural issues. He said, "You've heard it said to the people long ago, 'You shall not murder,' and anyone who murders will be subject to the judgment. But I tell you that anyone who's angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment." He turns it upside down. He goes on to say, "You've heard it said, 'You shall not commit adultery.' But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery in her heart." And a little bit later, he said, "You've heard it said, 'Love your neighbor and hate your enemy.' But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." And then there's an encounter with Jesus and a woman caught in adultery. And Jesus, what's he do? The cultural expectation would be, at the very least, that he would condemn her or maybe stone her as required by the law. But he doesn't. He forgives her and tells her to stop her sin and to leave her sinful lifestyle behind. Jesus is constantly, throughout his ministry, turning cultural expectations upside down. Our culture today says, hey, if you're in junior high or high school or even in college, you really can't do ministry. You're not old enough, you're not smart enough, you're not experienced enough, you're not trained. And here Jesus is, before culture considered him an adult, before he's fully trained, and he's creating a sense of wonder with his words and understanding. Yes, he's Jesus, but I think there's something in that for all of us. Jesus leaned into his calling, and he began to fulfill the purpose that God had sent him for. Some of you here today have been coming to church, maybe with your family since you were young. And you've been following your parents into the temple, if you will. And it's time for you to understand your role in doing God's work. This was the time that Jesus began moving toward the ministry that God sent him to do. And I'm praying that 2015 will be a year like that for many of us. Now, you might be a middle-aged adult sitting here saying, you know, when I was younger, I did feel like God put a call on my life, but it's too late for me now. I didn't follow it. Well, it's not too late for you now. It's not. You can lean into God's calling on your life. Maybe you go back to school, but that's not necessary. Just look for open doors in ministry, because God has put a call on your life for a reason. He's created you for a purpose. Ask God to show you how you can fulfill your calling. Talk to our pastoral staff. We'll be happy to help you find ways that you can be involved in ministry. But it's more likely that God has put something specific on your life that he wants you to do. And you don't have to come to us to find that out. Or you might be an older adult here asking, what can I do? Well, let me suggest a couple things that you can do. Look for those that God is calling out. And you can come alongside them and encourage them to follow God's call. I think God has gifted those of us that are a little bit later in life with the ability to see who He is raising up to be called out in ministry. When I was in the 4th grade, I had a Sunday school teacher say to me one day, "Chris, if you're not a preacher one day, I'll eat my hat." And I tried for 20 years, 25 years to see her eat her hat. And I remember the Sunday that I went back to my home church and preached the first time, and she was sitting right there in the front row, just beaming from ear to ear. Look for those that God is calling out and encourage them, come alongside of them. And something that we can all do is to pray for God to raise up and call out people into ministry. Luke 10:2 says this. Jesus told them, "The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field." We have a great opportunity as a congregation to live out this part of what I'm talking about this morning, to be praying for God to call out and raise up leaders like this out of our congregation. And there's something happening this week that's significant. You may have heard us talking about Friends Summit. There's about actually 400 young adults from around the country, from Friends churches around the country, and 40 from Rose Drive that are gathering in San Diego for the Friends Summit. And it's a time, and it's starting today and running through Thursday, and it's a time for them to have conversations and to pray, but to have conversations that will draw out their passion for the mission and the kingdom of God. And we as a church need to be praying for those 40 young people from our congregation that are going. Now, additionally to that, there are 20 not so young adults going along that are going to be serving as what they call advocates for those young adults, to support and pray with and encourage them during this week, but also to walk alongside of them when they come back home. And I just think it's a significant thing. Now, I know that many of those that are participating have already gone. But the way I'd like us to close our service this morning is I'm going to ask Dave to come, and we're going to ask if you happen to be here and are going to Friends Summit, if you would allow us to pray for you, but also use you as representative of the 40 from our church and the 400 that have already gone, if you would just stand so that we can be praying for you. And I know there's a few that are going as presenters and advocates and participants, and so if that's you, if you would stand so we can be praying for you. And then I don't know what you want to do to close it from here, but I'm done.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks, Chris. I'll